When Lyudmila Pavlichenko addressed the International Student Assembly in Washington, D.C. in 1942, she delivered a challenge that silenced the room. "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old and I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The statement was not bravado, but simple arithmetic, the grim mathematics of a young Soviet woman who had become the most lethal female sniper in recorded military history. Her story represents far more than an exceptional individual achievement. It stands as a profound challenge to conventional assumptions about women in combat, a window into the desperate totality of the Eastern Front's warfare, and a masterclass in how the Soviet Union weaponized both human skill and propaganda to sustain its existential struggle against Nazi Germany. The historical thesis is unambiguous. Lyudmila Pavlichenko shattered fundamental assumptions about gender, combat capability, and the nature of modern warfare. Before her public emergence, women in direct combat roles remained largely theoretical or relegated to auxiliary functions in most military establishments. After her highly publicized service and subsequent diplomatic tour of Allied nations, the conversation shifted irreversibly. She demonstrated with quantifiable lethality that women could not merely participate in combat, but could excel at one of warfare's most psychologically demanding and technically precise specializations. The social and political climate that produced Lyudmila Pavlichenko was distinctively Soviet. Born on July 12, 1916, in Bila Tserakva, a small city south of Kiev, she came of age during the tumultuous early years of the Soviet project. The Soviet Union of the 1920s and 1930s promoted an aggressive campaign of physical culture and militarized sport, particularly among youth organizations. The Osoaviakim, the Society for the Promotion of Defense and Aviation Chemical Development, organized shooting clubs, aviation training, and paramilitary education for millions of Soviet citizens. This was not merely recreational sport, but deliberate preparation for the defense of the socialist state. Pavlichenko joined a shooting club while still a student, initially motivated not by martial ambition, but by simple competitiveness with a male neighbor who had begun bragging about his marksmanship. This detail reveals the particular psychology that would sustain her through the horrors of frontline combat. She was driven not by ideology alone, though she was certainly a committed Soviet patriot, but by an intense personal determination to prove herself equal or superior to male peers. By the time she enrolled at Kiev University to study history in 1937, she had already achieved marksman classification. She married young, gave birth to a son, and divorced, all while pursuing her academic studies and maintaining her shooting proficiency. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, the Soviet Union faced an existential crisis of unparalleled scope. Soviet forces along the western frontier collapsed in chaos, with entire armies encircled and destroyed in the opening weeks. In this catastrophic context, the Soviet Union mobilized every available resource. Pavlichenko, then 24 years old and in her fourth year at university, immediately attempted to enlist. Recruitment officers suggested she become a nurse, the traditional female role in wartime medical services. Pavlichenko refused, insisting on combat assignment as a rifleman. Her existing marksmanship credentials eventually secured her acceptance into the Red Army's infantry, specifically the 25th Rifle Division defending Odessa. She left her young son in the care of relatives, shouldered a rifle, and traveled to the front lines where Romanian and German armies were advancing toward the critical Black Sea port. The Soviet approach to sniper warfare evolved from both Tsarist military tradition and the particular experiences of the Russian Civil War. Soviet military theorists recognized that modern industrial warfare, despite its mechanization and mass firepower, still created tactical situations where individual marksmanship could achieve disproportionate effect. The sniper, properly trained and employed, could disrupt enemy command and control by eliminating officers and NCOS, suppress enemy movement through fear of sudden death, and conduct reconnaissance by observing enemy positions. By 1941, Soviet sniper doctrine emphasized concealment and camouflage, patience and observation, shot discipline to avoid revealing position, and counter-sniper operations to neutralize enemy marksmen. First, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was initially issued a Mosin Nagant 1891/30 rifle chambered in 7.62 by 54 mm, the standard Soviet sniper rifle. The weapon featured a turned-down bolt handle to accommodate the PE or PU 3.5 times telescopic sight, weighed approximately 4 kilograms, and possessed an effective range of 800 meters in skilled hands, though most sniper engagements occurred at ranges of 400 meters or less. Second, the 25th Chapayev Rifle Division, to which Pavlichenko was assigned, was a regular Red Army formation deployed to defend Odessa against the advancing Romanian 4th Army and German 11th Army. The division comprised approximately 10,000 personnel organized into 3 rifle regiments, supporting artillery and auxiliary units, though it was chronically under strength during the defensive operations. Third, Soviet sniper training in 1941 varied dramatically in quality and duration. Pre-war trained snipers attended specialized schools lasting several months, learning fieldcraft, range estimation, ballistics, camouflage techniques, and psychological preparation. Wartime expedient training, which many snipers, including Pavlichenko, received, consisted of abbreviated courses lasting days or weeks, with emphasis on immediate practical skills. Fourth, Pavlichenko achieved her first 2 confirmed kills within days of arriving at the front near Belyayevka, a small town north of Odessa, in August 1941. Her initial kill rate during the Odessa defense averaged approximately 2 to 3 confirmed kills per week, a figure that would increase as she gained experience and as combat intensified. Fifth, the Siege of Odessa, which lasted from August the 5th to October the 16th, 1941, involved approximately 35,000 Soviet defenders, including naval infantry, regular army units, and militia, facing Romanian and German forces numbering approximately 340,000. The defenders utilized favorable terrain and fortified positions to inflict disproportionate casualties before evacuating by sea to Sevastopol. Soviet sniper doctrine placed particular emphasis on counter-sniper operations, the dangerous art of hunting enemy snipers who were themselves hunting Soviet personnel. This required patience measured in hours or days, keen observation to detect subtle signs of a concealed sniper position, understanding of terrain and likely hide locations, and the psychological fortitude to wait for a single-shot opportunity while knowing that the enemy sniper was attempting the same. Pavlichenko would become particularly proficient at this specialized form of combat, eventually credited with eliminating 36 enemy snipers during her career. The equipment available to Soviet snipers in 1941 reflected both the strengths and weaknesses of Soviet industrial mobilization. The Mosin Nagant rifle was a robust, reliable weapon, well suited to the harsh conditions of the Eastern Front. Its bolt-action mechanism was simple and tolerant of mud, cold, and neglect. The 7.62 by 54 mm R cartridge delivered sufficient energy for reliable kills at practical combat ranges. However, the optical sights were of variable quality, often suffering from poor lens clarity, inadequate adjustment mechanisms, and fragility under combat conditions. Pavlichenko and other experienced snipers learned to carefully select and maintain their equipment. The nature of the front that Pavlichenko entered in August 1941 was shaped by the strategic disaster unfolding across the entire Soviet western frontier. Operation Barbarossa had achieved its initial objectives with devastating efficiency. The Romanian army, allied with Germany, contributed substantial forces to the southern axis, particularly for the Siege of Odessa. The city, isolated from land communication with the rest of Soviet forces, was supplied and reinforced entirely by the Black Sea Fleet. Odessa's defenders faced combined arms assaults employing infantry, artillery, armor, and air power. This static warfare created ideal conditions for sniper employment, with relatively fixed front lines, allowing snipers to study enemy positions and select targets systematically. Pavlichenko's introduction to combat was abrupt and unforgiving. Her first 2 kills occurred during a German infantry assault near Belyayevka. She observed enemy soldiers advancing across open ground, selected targets, controlled her breathing as she had been taught in shooting club years earlier, and pressed the trigger. The men fell. This moment, the deliberate taking of human life through precisely aimed fire, represented a psychological threshold that many soldiers never successfully cross. Pavlichenko crossed it immediately and without apparent hesitation. The Siege of Odessa, from August to October 1941, represented Pavlichenko's baptism of fire and her initial accumulation of confirmed kills. The Soviet defensive system at Odessa consisted of 3 concentric defense lines, utilizing the Dniester and Kuyalnik rivers as natural obstacles. Romanian forces, primarily the Fourth Army under General Nicolae Ciuperca, launched repeated assaults against these positions throughout August and September. The fighting was characterized by massed infantry attacks supported by artillery bombardment, followed by savage close-quarters combat when Romanian forces penetrated Soviet defensive positions. Pavlichenko operated within this chaotic environment with increasing effectiveness. Her role as a sniper meant she was not directly involved in hand-to-hand fighting, but instead provided precision fire support, eliminating enemy officers, machine gun crews, and forward observers. Each confirmed kill required verification by a witnessing officer or commissar, ensuring accurate accounting and preventing inflated claims. By the end of the Odessa defense, she had achieved approximately 187 confirmed kills, an extraordinary figure reflecting both her individual skill and the target-rich environment of sustained siege warfare. The decision to evacuate Odessa in mid-October 1941 reflected the broader deterioration of Soviet strategic position. Soviet High Command determined that Odessa's defenders would be more valuable reinforcing Sevastopol, the major Soviet naval base, on the southern tip of Crimea. The evacuation, conducted by the Black Sea Fleet over several nights in mid-October, successfully withdrew approximately 35,000 troops along with equipment and supplies. Pavlichenko was among those evacuated, her unit redeployed by ship to Sevastopol, where an even more desperate siege would unfold. Sevastopol, a heavily fortified naval base and city, became the focal point of German efforts to secure Crimea and eliminate Soviet presence on the Black Sea. The siege, which lasted from October 1941 until July 1942, represented one of the longest and most brutal urban sieges of the war. German forces, primarily the 11th Army under General Erich von Manstein, systematically invested the city, bringing forward heavy siege artillery, including massive railway guns, and concentrating air power for sustained bombardment. Soviet defenders, including the Independent Coastal Army and Black Sea Fleet naval infantry, contested every defensive position with fanatical determination. The terrain and urban environment of Sevastopol created dramatically different conditions from the relatively open ground around Odessa. The city occupied hilly terrain, with numerous ravines and gullies, providing covered approaches and complex fields of fire. The urban environment included multi-story buildings, underground facilities, and fortified positions that channeled combat into close-range engagements. For a sniper, this environment offered both opportunities and challenges. The complex terrain provided excellent concealment and multiple vantage points, but also created shorter engagement ranges and required constant repositioning to avoid German counter-sniper detection. Pavlichenko's service at Sevastopol marked the peak of her combat effectiveness. Operating within the 25th Chapayev Rifle Division, now defending sectors of the inner defensive ring, she conducted daily sniper missions targeting German infantry, officers, and enemy snipers. Her confirmed kill count rose steadily throughout the winter and spring of 1942. She developed partnerships with other snipers, particularly Leonid Kitsenko, who became both her spotter and romantic partner before being killed in combat. The loss of Kitsenko exemplified the emotional toll of sustained combat, though Pavlichenko continued her missions without apparent diminishment of effectiveness. The nature of combat at Sevastopol evolved through several distinct phases. The initial German assaults in November and December 1941 attempted to seize the city through rapid offensive operations, but were repulsed with heavy casualties. The winter period saw a relative stalemate as both sides reinforced and resupplied. The final German offensive, launched in June 1942, employed overwhelming firepower, including continuous bombardment by artillery and aircraft, eventually breaking through Soviet defensive lines through sheer attrition. Pavlichenko's daily routine during the Sevastopol siege followed the pattern established at Odessa but intensified by the closer quarters and higher combat density. She would move to forward positions in darkness, often crawling the final approaches to avoid observation. Once positioned, she would remain concealed for hours, observing German lines through her scope, identifying targets, waiting for shot opportunities. Priority targets included German officers identifiable by their different uniforms and behavior, machine gun crews whose weapons suppressed Soviet infantry, and enemy snipers whose presence was detected through careful observation of suspicious positions. The psychological dimension of sniper warfare manifested in the phenomenon of sniper duels, where Soviet and German snipers engaged in extended cat-and-mouse games attempting to locate and eliminate each other. These engagements could last days, with each sniper studying the patterns and positions of their opponent, setting up decoys or false positions to draw fire, waiting for a single moment of carelessness that would reveal location. Pavlichenko participated in numerous such duels. The stress of these confrontations, knowing that an enemy sniper was actively hunting you with equivalent skill and equipment, created psychological pressure that exceeded the ordinary dangers of frontline service. By late May 1942, Pavlichenko had achieved approximately 309 confirmed kills, making her one of the most lethal snipers in the Red Army. This figure, verified through the Soviet system of requiring witnessed confirmation for each kill, represented an extraordinary achievement reflecting exceptional marksmanship, tactical judgment, psychological resilience, and survival instinct. The number included approximately 36 enemy snipers, confirming her proficiency at the specialized and highly dangerous work of counter-sniper operations. The climax of Lyudmila Pavlichenko's combat career arrived through the random violence that characterized industrialized warfare. In June 1942, during the final German offensive that would ultimately capture Sevastopol, she was severely wounded by mortar shell fragments. Shrapnel from an exploding shell struck her face and body, causing significant injury, though not immediately life-threatening wounds. She was evacuated from her position, received medical treatment at a field hospital, and was subsequently deemed unfit for further frontline service. This wounding effectively ended her combat career at age 25, with a final confirmed kill count of 309 enemy soldiers. This figure placed her as the most successful female sniper in recorded military history, a distinction she retains to the present day. Soviet confirmation procedures required that each kill be witnessed by an officer or commissar, creating reasonable confidence in the accuracy of the count. The figure almost certainly represents a conservative count, as kills that could not be verified were not credited. The composition of her 309 kills included the especially notable figure of 36 enemy snipers eliminated through counter-sniper operations. This subset represented Pavlichenko's most dangerous work, as enemy snipers were specifically trained to avoid detection, operated from well-concealed positions, and were actively hunting Soviet personnel. The wounds she sustained in June 1942 left permanent facial scarring and required extended recovery. More significant was the psychological impact of 10 months of sustained combat stress, repeated near-death experiences, the loss of comrades including her partner Leonid Kitsenko, and the accumulated psychological weight of deliberately killing 309 human beings. Rather than medical discharge, Pavlichenko's removal from combat initiated her transformation into a propaganda and diplomatic asset of extraordinary value to the Soviet war effort. Soviet leadership recognized that her achievements, combined with her youth, gender, and compelling personal narrative, could be weaponized for propaganda purposes. She was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest military decoration, becoming one of the first women to receive this honor during the war. More significantly, she was selected for a diplomatic tour of allied nations, specifically the United States, Canada, and Britain, to promote Soviet-Allied cooperation and encourage the opening of a second front in Western Europe. The tour, conducted in late 1942, represented a remarkable chapter in wartime diplomacy. Pavlichenko, accompanied by Soviet officials and interpreters, traveled extensively through the United States, giving speeches, attending rallies, meeting with political leaders, and granting numerous press interviews. Her message was carefully crafted but sincerely delivered. The Soviet Union was bearing the overwhelming burden of fighting Nazi Germany, suffering catastrophic casualties, and required Allied support through the opening of a second front. The American press reception was complex and often revealing of Western cultural assumptions about women and warfare. Many journalists focused on superficial aspects of her appearance, asking questions about her use of cosmetics, her hairstyle, and whether she wore a uniform skirt. Pavlichenko responded to such questions with barely concealed contempt, at one point remarking to reporters that she wore no makeup on the front lines and suggesting that perhaps American reporters should be more concerned with fighting fascism than with her grooming choices. Her speech to the International Student Assembly in Washington, D.C., where she delivered her famous challenge about gentlemen hiding behind her back, became a defining moment of the tour. The speech, delivered to an audience of young Americans who faced conscription and potential combat service, was calculated to shame American hesitation about opening a second front. The rhetoric was aggressive, even confrontational, but it resonated powerfully with audiences who recognized the disparity between Soviet sacrifice and American safety. Perhaps the most personally significant relationship Pavlichenko developed during her American tour was with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. The two women, despite vast differences in background and experience, formed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to women's advancement. Roosevelt invited Pavlichenko to stay at the White House for several days, an extraordinary gesture that symbolized both personal warmth and official recognition of Pavlichenko's importance. The relationship continued through correspondence for years after the tour concluded. The diplomatic impact of Pavlichenko's tour is difficult to quantify precisely, but was certainly significant. She humanized Soviet suffering for American audiences who had limited understanding of Eastern Front conditions. She challenged gender stereotypes about women's combat capability through her own undeniable achievements. She created public pressure for Second Front action that contributed to the political calculus leading to Operation Overlord in 1944. Upon completing her Allied tour, Pavlichenko returned to the Soviet Union, where she was assigned to train other snipers, sharing her tactical knowledge and combat experience with new soldiers heading to the front. She spent the remainder of the war in training and propaganda roles, never returning to frontline combat. The long-term impact of Lyudmila Pavlichenko's wartime service extended far beyond her personal kill count or even her diplomatic contributions. She permanently altered the conversation about women in combat roles, providing undeniable evidence that women could not merely serve in auxiliary capacities, but could excel at specialized combat roles requiring technical skill, tactical judgment, and psychological resilience. Prior to World War II, women in virtually all military establishments were confined to nursing, clerical, and support functions. Combat roles were considered inherently male domains, with exclusion justified through claims about physical capacity, psychological unsuitability, or social propriety. Pavlichenko's 309 confirmed kills demolished such assumptions through simple arithmetic. She had killed more enemy soldiers than the vast majority of male combat veterans. She had survived 10 months of sustained frontline service under conditions that killed or wounded countless male soldiers. She had excelled at specialized sniper warfare requiring patience, precision, and tactical sophistication. No credible argument could be made that she or women generally lacked capacity for combat effectiveness. The Soviet Union's employment of women in combat roles during World War II represented unprecedented scale and scope. Approximately 800,000 Soviet women served in various military capacities during the war, with significant numbers in direct combat roles including snipers, tank crews, pilots, and infantry. This massive mobilization reflected both Soviet ideological commitment to gender equality and desperate manpower requirements as casualties mounted. The Soviet Union could not afford to exclude half its population from military service when facing existential threat. The specific lessons that Allied nations drew from Pavlichenko's story varied by national context. Soviet propaganda emphasized her achievements as evidence of socialist system superiority and the new Soviet woman who was equal to men in all domains, including warfare. Western interpretations were more ambivalent, acknowledging her individual achievement while often treating her as an exceptional case rather than evidence for systematic women's combat integration. The United States military, despite witnessing Pavlichenko's accomplishments, would not seriously consider women in combat roles until decades later. Pavlichenko's post-war life reflected the complex relationship between wartime heroism and peacetime adjustment. She completed her history degree at Kiev University, eventually earning a doctorate and working as a Soviet naval historian. She married again, though details of her personal life remained largely private. She participated in various Soviet veterans organizations and served as a public symbol of Soviet victory. However, she never fully escaped the shadow of her combat experiences. Friends and colleagues reported that she struggled with what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, experiencing nightmares and difficulty with civilian adjustment. Modern historiography of Pavlichenko has produced more nuanced understanding while also raising questions about specific details of her story. Western historians initially treated Soviet kill count claims with skepticism, suspecting propaganda inflation. However, examination of Soviet confirmation procedures and comparison with German records where available has generally supported the accuracy of confirmed kill figures. The question of kill count accuracy remains subject to historical debate, though most serious historians accept the 309 figure as substantially accurate. Soviet procedures requiring witness confirmation provided reasonable verification, though imperfect. Recent discoveries and archival research have added details to understanding of Pavlichenko's service and post-war life. Russian archives opened after the Soviet Union's collapse provided access to military records, personal correspondence, and official documents that flesh out the bare bones of her combat service. Western archives, particularly in the United States, have preserved extensive documentation of her American tour, including press coverage, speech transcripts, and correspondence with Eleanor Roosevelt, providing rich material for understanding her international impact. The enduring significance of Lyudmila Pavlichenko lies in how her story continues to resonate in contemporary debates about women in combat. Modern militaries, including the United States Armed Forces, have progressively opened combat roles to women over the past several decades. These policy shifts rest on evidence and arguments about women's capabilities that Pavlichenko demonstrated definitively 3/4 of a century earlier. Her example remains rhetorically powerful in debates about gender and military service. Pavlichenko died on October 10, 1974, at age 58, following a stroke. She was buried with full military honors in Moscow's WW2 cemetery, the resting place of Soviet heroes. Her gravestone records her name, dates, and her title as Hero of the Soviet Union, omitting the 309 kills that defined her public identity. This absence is perhaps appropriate, suggesting that her legacy transcends the grim arithmetic of confirmed kills to encompass broader questions about women's capabilities, the human cost of warfare, and the complex relationship between individual achievement and historical circumstance. She remains, decades after her death, the most famous female combat soldier in military history, her name synonymous with lethal effectiveness and the shattering of assumptions about women's roles in warfare.